The shadow of colonialism loomed over Vietnam after World War II. The Vietnamese people, led by Ho Chi Minh, had fought bravely against Japanese occupation. They yearned for independence, a dream deferred for centuries under French colonial rule. Ho Chi Minh declared independence for Vietnam in 1945, inspired by the ideals of self-determination. However, France sought to reassert control, leading to the First Indochina War. The United States, entangled in Cold War tensions, found itself increasingly drawn into the conflict. America's fear of communism, the so-called domino theory, fueled its involvement. The U.S. provided financial and military aid to France. France's defeat at Dien Bien Phu in 1954 signaled the end of their colonial ambitions in Vietnam. The Geneva Accords that followed divided Vietnam, setting the stage for America's deeper entanglement in the region. The 1954 Geneva Accords, intended to bring peace, instead sowed the seeds of further conflict. Vietnam was temporarily divided along the 17th parallel. The North, under Ho Chi Minh, became the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, embracing communism. The South, with U.S. support, established the Republic of Vietnam, led by Ngo Dinh Diem. The division was intended to be temporary, with nationwide elections planned for 1956. However, Diem, fearing a communist victory, refused to hold the elections. The communist Viet Cong launched attacks against the Diem regime. The U.S. increased military aid to South Vietnam, sending advisors to train and equip the South Vietnamese army. America's involvement in Vietnam was gradually escalating, driven by a complex interplay of factors. The Gulf of Tonkin incident in August 1964 marked a turning point in America's involvement in Vietnam. The incident, involving alleged attacks on U.S. Navy destroyers by North Vietnamese torpedo boats, remains shrouded in controversy. Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, granting President Lyndon B. Johnson broad authority to conduct military operations in Southeast Asia. The U.S. embarked on a sustained bombing campaign against North Vietnam, Operation Rolling Thunder. The U.S. also deployed ground troops in large numbers, marking a significant escalation. American soldiers found themselves engaged in a brutal guerrilla war against the Viet Cong. The Tet Offensive in January 1968, launched by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army, shook America to its core. The offensive involved coordinated attacks on cities and towns across South Vietnam. Although the offensive was militarily a defeat for the Communists, it proved to be a decisive turning point in the war. The Tet Offensive shattered the American public's perception that the war was winnable. The images of the fighting contradicted the optimistic assessments of progress from the Johnson administration. The Tet Offensive fueled the anti-war movement in the United States, turning public opinion against the war. The brutality of the fighting and the high casualties led many Americans to question the purpose of U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Facing mounting pressure, President Lyndon B. Johnson announced he would not seek re-election in 1968. The war in Vietnam was now deeply intertwined with American politics and society. The anti-war movement in the United States gained momentum throughout the 1960s, fueled by a growing awareness of the horrors of the Vietnam War. College campuses became hotbeds of protest, with students organizing teach-ins, demonstrations, and draft card burnings. The movement drew support from a diverse coalition of students, civil rights activists, clergy, and ordinary citizens. They argued that the war was unjust, draining resources from domestic programs and claiming the lives of thousands of young Americans. The anti-war movement was met with resistance from those who supported the war effort, often referred to as hawks. The debate over Vietnam divided the nation, creating deep fissures within American society. The anti-war movement's impact on American public opinion would eventually force a change in U.S. policy toward Vietnam. Richard Nixon's election in 1968 ushered in a new phase in the Vietnam War. Nixon implemented Vietnamization, aiming to withdraw U.S. troops while strengthening the South Vietnamese military. U.S. troop levels decreased, but the war continued. Nixon expanded the conflict into Cambodia and Laos. These actions fueled the anti-war movement, leading to widespread protests. In 1973, the U.S. signed the Paris Peace Accords, agreeing to a ceasefire and withdrawal. The North Vietnamese launched a massive offensive in 1975. Saigon fell on April 30, 1975, marking the end of the Vietnam War.